Okay, here we are at 6:30 on the dot. Good evening, everyone. I think it's a great time to get started now. I still see quite a few folks trickling in, but we have a lot of folks registered tonight, so I expect we'll have a few more in a few minutes to come. But hi, my name is Grace Fork. I'm a conservation specialist with the Alberta Wilderness Association, and thank you so much for joining us for this Coal and Economics Town Hall. So before we get started, I'll start us off with a few housekeeping notes. You'll notice that we are recording tonight's presentation, so no worries if you miss anything that any one of the presenters has said, as we'll be uploading the recording to YouTube sometime tomorrow, and the link will be shared with you all, as well as all of the presentations will be uploaded to our website at albertawilderness.ca. So the second note is you'll note that as participants, you are muted and have your cameras off tonight. However, do not let this discourage you from using the chat. We will be having a panel discussion at the end of the 4 presentations. And so please do use the chat to ask your questions, do it throughout the presentations, and it would be great if you could also let us know which presenter it's directed to, or if it could go to any one of the presenters. So as we've learned from the previous town hall that we held last month on health and coal, coal development impacts all aspects of water, of people in communities, of ecosystems. And these are among some of the many reasons I would like to acknowledge that tonight, those of us at AWA headquarters are coming to you from Mohkinstsis. So this is the Blackfoot word for the meeting of the Bow and Elbow rivers. And this is an incredibly important gathering place for the Blackfoot people. So in this theme of gathering and coming together, we're coming together tonight as a community to discuss these kind of larger than life impacts from these massive environmental decisions that impact all aspects of our lives and our landscapes. So we're coming together tonight on Treaty 7 lands. These are the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, sorry, this happens when you're presenting, the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nations and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations. Mohkinstsis is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So I encourage you, whether you're on Treaty 7 lands or elsewhere, to take a moment to acknowledge the traditional protectors and stewards of our landscapes and our waters, and the ongoing efforts by many Indigenous communities for wilderness stewardship. And I'm also going to drop a link into the chat for you all. It's just a really great map where you can see all of the traditional territories, the treaties, and the languages from across Canada. So this is the second town hall that we've held in conjunction with the Coal Policy Working Group, a collaborative of conservation groups, of landowners, and of concerned individuals to address health, ecosystem, economic, and social impacts of coal development on our eastern slopes. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists tonight. Dr. Willem Langenberg is going to get us started off, followed by Cornelis Collen, Dr. Ian Urquhart from AWA, and Chris Severson Baker from Pembina Institute. So with that, I'm going to hand things off to the experts. I'll start by introducing Willem. So Dr. Willem Langenberg, after completing a PhD in structural geology from the University of Amsterdam in 1972, Willem worked for 35 years with the Alberta Geological Survey, documenting various geological resources of Alberta. He retired in 2009 and has volunteered his time since then as a geological advisor to the University of Alberta in his role as an adjunct professor. So welcome, Willem. I'm really looking forward to your presentation, and feel free to, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen here. You can share your screen now and take things away.
So yes, as you heard, I worked for 35 years with the Alberta Geological Survey, and we prided ourselves that we were providing the government with all the information on the geological resources. And yes, Alberta has really benefited from the coal and petroleum resources. A lot of our wealth and prosperity came from those resources. But We also prided ourselves that we provided a lot of data so that the government could be planning with these resources. And it feels the last few years with this planning of the coal mining in the eastern slopes, they're not using that information properly. So let me just introduce some of the geology, because coal is a rock. It's a rock that accumulated in swamps, and that happened for the coal resources in the Crossness Pass. It was 150 million years ago, during the period that's called the Jurassic. And so there were lots of swamps. There was also rivers and lakes, and so they deposited sands and muds. And during other times, there was also oceans intruded in the area, and so there was carbonate muds in the bottom of the seas, and also other muds. And during time, these sediments, they were buried beneath younger sediments, and so because of burial, they were exposed to higher temperatures and pressures. And so during that time, the sands, they became sandstones, the mud became shales, and those carbonate muds became limestones, and the swamps became coal. So all coal will burn, but for the steel industry, bituminous coal is used, and it's a special type of coal. And for that reason, because it's a bit more rare, it's financially worth more. And so Cornelis will be talking more about it. So then 60 million years, an important thing happened. The Rockies were formed, plate tectonic movements. And so these originally horizontal layers, they were deformed in folds and faults. And so these layers are now exposed at the surface, and they can be represented in what we call geological maps with different colors. And so this is the geological map from the Crossness Pass area, the Geological Survey of Canada, map 2200A. And so you can see the geology from Sparwood to the Crossness Pass and Lundbreck. And so the carbonate rocks, they are in blue, and so are there's the Livingston Range and the High Rock Range. And then in red, we are showing all the coal-bearing strata. So you can see there's a lot around Sparwood, the Elkview mine, and there's Tent Mountain, Vickery mine, where you have heard about, and Grassy Mountain that we're concerned about. So this is a view of the map view, but we can make a vertical cross section, a vertical section, so we can look in the subsurface. And so that's what we did. We constructed, we had information from oil wells and from seismic. And so we get a good picture from the subsurface. And this is the High Rock Range. This is the Livingston Range. In blue are these carbonates. And in red are these the coal-bearing measures of the. And so, for example, the Vickery Creek is coming to the surface here, and the Grassy Mountain mine is coming to the surface here. So just from Google Maps, we can see the area again from Sparwood to Blairmore, and the huge impact of the Elkview mine. And so that's, if the mining would be allowed here, this in a few years, it would be looking something like that as well. You can still see in Vickery Creek also some of the effects of the mining. So yeah, in the near Sparwood, that's the Tex Elkview mine, and it's a huge mine. It's been in operation for a long time, as you know. So they produce 7 million tons a year, and they still have reserves for 36 years. And Teck has 3 more mines in the Yaqui Valley, and the total production is 25 million tons a year, and reserves for at least 25 years. It's total reserve 625. It's huge. So this gives this is also a cross section where we don't see the faults and the folds, but just from the coal measures from the Elkview mine, we have 600 meters of section with many thick coal seams that are being mined there. And these coal seams then towards the Livingston area and the Open River, so where Grassy Mountain is, it's only about 100 meters of section. And so Benga is proposing to mine 4 million tons a year for 23 years. Total reserve is 92 million. So if they say it's exactly the same as in the Elk Valley, it's just not true. It's really not as good. Just from the geological setting, and it's way thinner, and we see that here. The only kind of reasonably thick coal seam is this seam number 2, and 4 is somewhat thinner. It's also and number 1 happens to be the best coal seam in coal quality that Cornelis will be talking about. It's discontinuous. That's why Gibson and Norris, the geologies of the Geological Survey, just didn't show as solid as at number 2 seam. So there's reserves of 92 million. There's 16% of the number 1 seam, and number 2 is 50%. It's the largest, and 34 for the number 4. So that just when we were working in the 80s, this was the view of Grassy Mountain. It was known as the Big Show, and it's still pretty much like that now, although I think the present drilling and roads have probably made it look slightly different, but nobody is allowed to go in there anymore now. But anyway, so we'll look at the map of this area. This is the geological map that was published by Don Norris in the Geological Survey of Canada, of information from Consol that have done a lot of exploration already. These are the coal seams. And so this is the pod area that we saw the picture of. And so we look at 2 vertical cross section, 5 first and then number 6. And this is how Don Norris, based on the Consol information, showed the information. You see the coal seams there with the numbers. Number 1 seam is discontinuous. It's not present on the east side. On the east side, it's only number 4. Number 2 seam, which is the main 6 seam, it's not present there either. So then cross section number 6, again, number 1 is discontinuous from the Consol drilling at the time, and not present on the east side. Neither is the number 2 seam, but the 2 seam at the pod area is very prominent. And so Benga, then this is the cross section about the same location as the cross section 1 that I just showed. They show a number 1 seam there, really thin, but really not good information. They also show a number 2 seam, which Consol didn't encounter there, and they show the number 2, the number 1 seam much more continuous on the east side. So we think there is still some problems in just the basic geology and resource figures. So there you can see where the cross section is. So this is a close-up of the Big Show. That it's really a fantastic educational site, because here you can touch the coal and you can see that the sands became the sandstones, and the muds became the shales, and here's also the Catamount conglomerate. And so like Monica Fields often took visitors from the Frank Slide Center to show some of the geology at Grassy Mountain when it was still available. And this is the detail as Don Norris showed, and these are tectonic forces that make these folded structures, and also the thickening of the coal in places. And so that makes it difficult to exactly determine the tonnage that's available from just putting a drill hole here or there would give a different picture. So I don't think that Benga has completely shown it in all the details that was possible. So in our big study in the 80s, when we looked at the coal quality of the whole mountains, all the mountains we worked, and this is grassy mountain, and so we sampled the coal, and so we determined what's called the volatile matter percentage, and it's really the rank of the coal you can determine with that. So it's going from 25 to 31%. It's kind of the gaseous content of the coal, and so it's indicating medium volatile bituminous coking coal. So in summary, there's really still uncertainty about the available tonnage of number one seam, but even also of number two seam. The total tonnage, we don't know exactly. Cornelis will be saying something about that too. So there's small reserves compared to the available reserves in the Elk Valley. And also the prediction that globally there will be less metallurgical coal needed in the next 25 years. So it's really not the predictions. A lot of people don't predict what the Australian coal mining companies are predicting. Then, of course, you all know that the environmental costs, they're just huge in the mountains, and they're never incalculated with a lot of these estimates. So we can expect a boom and bust for a possible coal industry. And does Alberta really need another Grand Cache? So I think the Crowsnest Pass will be way better served by concentrating on alternative industries such as tourism, recreation, and renewable energy. And I understand that there will be another town hall meeting kind of concentrating on these alternative industries. So yes, thank you for your interest.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Willem, for a really excellent presentation. So I'm going to keep things moving. We're going to go over next to Cornelis Colin. Cornelis graduated from TU Delft in the Netherlands with an MSc in mining engineering in 1983, retiring as a manager of technical marketing at Tech Coal in March of 2019. Throughout his career, he worked as a mining engineer and process engineer for coal, coke, and iron making in Australia, Europe, Asia, and the Americas. Initially employed by the Dutch steel industry in mining, the integrated steel plant, and as an international consultant. So today he's an independent consultant, and he's here to talk to us a little bit more about the specifics of Grassy, about metallurgical coal, and what it means for the market. So Cornelis, feel free to take things away.
Yeah, thanks so much, Grace. It's an honor to be able to present here. And I'll just try to share my screen at the moment. And there we are. Where is it? Desktop. There it is. Should be working now. If you see something popping up.
It is showing up. It's currently, oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, there's a bit of a delay as usual. That's not a problem.
All good.
I'll just make it a bit bigger for people to see. Okay. Well, there we go. So first, the topics I would like to touch on. So the difference between metallurgical coal and thermal coal. Then the coke from metallurgical coking coal, you make coke of this, and you use this coke in the blast furnace. And I'll talk a bit about the seaborne coking coal market development and the future iron production forecast. Then the met coal price fluctuations and benchmarking, as one coal's value is compared to the others. Then the Crow's Nest coal mine history and the shutdowns. Then Grassy Mountain product quality and value decline over its 23-year mine life, and it declines very quickly. As Willem said, Seam 1 is nearly gone quite soon. Then Alberta, other mines and projects and mine liabilities. And then the cautionary tale from 3 Northeast British Columbia swing mines, I call them. They open and close. They've got perpetual problems with their coal quality and market pricing. As the price goes down, they shut. Then conclusions, and I've got some reference links at the end. So Here's the difference between met coal, metallurgical coal, and thermal coal. As Willem already explained to you, that you've got the peat swamp, and then the plants grow and they make the peat swamp thicker and thicker. And there was a fresh water sea there, like the Bearspaw Sea. And on occasion, the sand was washed across the peat. And then when it was high enough, a new forest grew, a new moss grew, and so on and so on. It builds up. So you got all these layers of, say, sandstone, limestone, shale, and layers of peat in between, which became coking coal. And at the right-hand side here of this diagram, you can see the coking coal is just a sweet spot. It's compressed enough to make coking coal. The younger coal is thermal coal, it's not enough compressed. And on the right side, it's too much compressed, it's anthracite. So we're right in this sweet spot. And they were, these formations, or the peat was laid down some 160 to 135 million years ago. And it was all horizontal. And then, as Willem explained, the Rockies were formed and they were put up at an angle, sometimes nearly vertical, or 45 degrees. That's why when you look at the Front Range, you see all these thrust faults. So when you heat bituminous coals in an airtight oven to 1100 degrees centigrade, they start to release gas, mostly methane, then light oils, tar, and they start to melt in that big oven. And then when they lose all their, what we call volatile matter, as Willem explained, they will solidify into coke chunks. So that these are just carbon chunks as big as your fist. And that's what you would charge into your blast furnace. So your younger, lower value thermal coals, they will only let go their gas, they won't melt, and they won't make coke. So that's only useful for in power stations. Next slide. Now on the top you see two pictures of some huge ovens, and they take 30 to 50 tons of coal per oven, and they heat the charge, the coal charge, for 16 to 48 hours. As the gas is released, it becomes sort of a gooey, tarry liquid and then solidifies into coke. Now, what's important here is the fluidity of the coal. So as it heats, it starts to melt. How fluid is it? Yeah, because in the molten phase, it can realign itself at all the components in the coal and start to form a coke, a lattice. And then that lattice will start to solidify into these coke chunks. So that's what you call the cold strength of coke, the chunks. And then you push these chunks from the oven and you quench them using water. Then you've also got the coke strength after reaction. And this is what happens in the blast furnace. It's exposed to a very aggressive process of over 1100 degrees centigrade as liquid iron is formed. And that coke must not degrade that much. So that's the coke strength after reaction with the aggressive gas. And we just have to keep these two indicators in mind. There's many more, but I just concentrate on these. Next slide. So how coke is used in the blast furnace. Lots of text I'll just explain. On the right-hand side, here you see the little diagram, and here's the blast furnace. Now this is a huge silo. They call it a counter-current reactor. And on the top, you put, and it's about 80 meters tall. And the diameter is 14 meters or more, 1.4 meters at the bottom. And there's up to, you see here, these blue things. There's a circular line around it. And through it, you inject hot blast air, superheated air at 1200 degrees into this oven. The temperature will be 2200 degrees, and it will only partly combust the coke, so you make a lot of carbon monoxide. And the carbon monoxide is what will reduce the iron ore. Here you see all these layers of coke, red is iron ore, coke iron ore, and so on. And as this CO2 comes into contact with the iron ore, just the rust, it will come into liquid iron, and it will drip down into the furnace, as will the liquid slag. And then you can tap it from the bottom, the hot slag and the hot metal. And then the hot metal goes to the steel shop to be refined. So you take out 4% carbon, you take out the sulfur, you take out the phos, and you take out nitrogen, hydrogen, many, many impurities. And then it can be used to make your finished product, your rolled steel. So this blast furnace needs very strong coke. it's not only mechanical strength, because it's an 80-meter high column pushing down on that coke, it's also being attacked by aggressive gas. So it must not be too reactive. And after being attacked, its typical strength index should be around the 65. The typical range is 63 to 68. And this is used, one of the indicators for the value of your coal, how strong a CSR the coke it will make. And the larger the blast furnace, and the higher your fuel injection, you put at the bottom, and the higher your production rate, the higher your CSR requirement. The stronger your coke must be, the stronger against chemical attack, and the stronger against mechanical attack. And this is what drives the value apart from other issues like sulfur, phos, and so on. Any question, just let me know. Then the seaborne coking coal markets, look at the diagram at the right again. You see here US dollars per ton, vertical, horizontal, these are the production. And these are all the major hard coking coal mines in the world and their cost structure. So if you have the cheap mines to the left, and you've got the massively expensive mines to the right, like Mozambique, Africa. And here you can see that one of the most important benchmark is the Australian prime hard coking coal, the best quality hard coking coal in the world, with which our Elk Valley coals from Teck can compete. And you see it coming down, 2019, here to 2020, then it's just about $130 a ton. And what these coals are all traded seaborne metallurgical coal. So all these coals are shipped from Australia or the United States or Canada to the prime markets, which would be Japan, China, South Korea, India, and Europe. And the biggest export in the world is Australia, 60% of the coal. You've got USA 14. These are swing mines. A few years ago, you know, they were much less. Canada is about on par, and then the other ones. And USA became this big an exporter because they allowed mountaintop mining with minimum environmental regulation. And so they could mine very cheaply because they didn't have to face the consequences of basically violating the Rockies, enormous environmental consequences for health of the people and water and so on. So yeah, don't try to compete against these, you know, it's just not responsible. Then although the coal supply costs tend to decrease, the coal price deteriorated more. So it's a never-ending race to the bottom. And the prime hard coal is the highest value grade. It is in Australia, and it also is in our Elk Valley here in BC. So I can continue from here down. The future seaborne coking coal markets and iron production. So the projected met coal exports by land and sea decline. 2018 is say the base, so it's only 94% in 2021 and only 88% in 2025. And this whole export by land and sea, most of it is exported via the sea. You see, 85 to 90%. That's what Teck coal, but also Benga and the others are competing against. So the forecast world blast furnace iron making, it peaks around this time, 1.4 billion tons, and it gradually declines to 1.1 billion tons in 2050. So also the coking coal demand will decline, and it will decline more than your blast furnace iron making, because many advanced steel companies in Europe, Japan, and South Korea, and also now India and China, they're forever increasing the efficiency of their blast furnace with different charging materials, better process control. So for that same ton of iron, hot metal, you need less and less coke. And you inject more and more fuel, you use partly reduced iron. Okay, these are all details, but you will see a future growth in crude steel production, but it will not be produced by the blast furnace. It will be by alternate technologies like electric arc furnaces, direct reduced iron processes, like Midrex with hydrogen. Yeah. So like in Sweden, they had a test plant started last June, 100,000 ton a year. That's small. They said it will take 10 years to be commercially viable. Well, the 5 million ton a year steel plant will be commissioned just in 3 years' time. So you see an enormous exponential development technology all over the world. and that doesn't bode well for coking coal mines. Another challenge for coking coal mines is the enormous fluctuations of the price. So on the right-hand side, you see the bulk commodity prices, and on the left, you see iron ore, US dollar per ton, and it goes up and down with the economy. Thermal coal, up and down with the economy. And the right-hand side, the coking coal. Now this here, you see the scale is twice as high. It's twice the value of your thermal coal, approximately. It follows the same panic curves, you know, when there's a slump, bang, down the price goes. The orange ones are the spot price. So now there's something happening in China. There's a trade war, China and Australia, they don't accept the coal. There might be a little spike, but it will be over before you know it. Yeah. So Benga took about $140 a ton for the prime hard coking coal. Well, they don't produce it. It's 80% of the value at best, their coal. They won't get that price. And now the price is down to $114 a ton international. The prime hard coking coal benchmark as shipped from Queensland, Australia. They're the market leaders to set the price. So here's a problem straight away for Benga. So the crow's coal mining history and shutdowns. So the met coal mines west of the crow's area, from Bellevue to Coleman, were shutting down in the 60s and early 70s. Grassy in 1960, Tent Mountain was the last to shut in 83. And why did these shut down? Well, this blast furnace getting bigger and bigger. You had, say, 500 cubic meter blast furnaces. They were developing to 2,000 cubic meters. Now there's 5,000 cubic meter blast furnaces, ever higher productivity. You need ever higher quality coke. These mines have inadequate quality met coal to make this strong coke. So they had to shut down. And I've been to data rooms 12 years ago, but want to sell this area around Coleman to tech, and I had a negative advice there. So they were the key customers and also investors in these mines were the Japanese steel industry. And they withdrew from these mines. The coal was not good enough. So they shut down. Yeah. And you can still use some of that lower value coal, but the price will be a lot lower. And there's enormous competition. Australia can produce these coals closer to the coast, much cheaper, these lower grade coals, than we can here. Yeah, so there's a big hurdle here for these mines to overcome to produce a second-rate coal. And that's why they will probably be swing mines. And I've spoken to these Japanese personally. So shortly after these shutdowns, with new developing mine technology and equipment, the Elk Valley coal deposit BC became technically and economically viable. Because fantastic coal. So they produced considerably higher quality and market value metallurgical coal. So there was Balmer mine, which was Westar, which is now Elkview. There's Fording River, which was Fording coal, then became Elk Valley coal, now it's Teck coal. Line Creek was Luscar, Shell Luscar, it's also Teck coal. Green Hills was Westar, is now Teck coal, 83. And these mines are all still operating. So you see here that the product quality decline for Grassy Mountain, it's a blend of 3 seams. 3 seams is the best quality. But as Willem explained, there's hardly enough of it. So they will only produce a reasonable quality coal the first year, and it will drop down as the quality, as the percentage of 1 seam drops down in the blend. Here you see the CSR going from 65 down to 62, and the fluidity goes from 127 down to 7. And with this low fluidity, this coal can't properly interact with the other coals of the coke maker's blend. You typically have 8 coals, it won't interact that nicely, so the value goes down. And the decline occurs as not only 1 seam nearly vanishes, but the mining cost will incur because the mine gets deeper, you have to move more mountain for the same ton of coal, and also the haulage distance to take the coal to the wash plant will increase. So the value goes dramatically down, and your mining costs increase. I don't think that's favorable. So if you look at the product quality, CSR decline versus the market, the benchmark, this is here where Elk Valley coal is. These are the prime hard coking coals here, the CSR. Look where they are. They start below and they just drop down to tier 2. And I think with the irregularity distribution of seam 1, they cannot always even make this. They'll have a second tier product, which will be not 80% value, but far less, 70 or 2/3 of the value. So they will get cash flow problems. So the red band is the desired quality for a prime coking coal, and they're here and even below. And the same thing for fluidity, how it forms coke and how it will interact with other coals in the coking coal blend to make a strong coke. This is where you want the fluidity to be for this rank of coal. This is where they are. Now, other mines and projects, just more red flags. Hancock Prospecting, they acquired Riversdale Benga in May 2019 for 700 million. And Benga was complicit in the Mozambique medical mining fiasco, where Rio Tinto bought this for $3.7 billion in 2011 and sold it within 2 years to Lucky India, to the state steel mills, and for just $50 million. And it kept it quiet for the shareholders. Rio Tinto was a huge scandal. And so the other examples is Montem, Chinook, very noisy at the moment. Well, they just have mostly tier 2, second-rate coal or less. And they just have one drill hole with 70 CSR, but it's only a small drill hole made in a small oven. And they only have 3.7 million tons measured resources. So that's proven. The others are indicated resources. And inferred resources, very vague, is maybe not there. And they still have a big hurdle. They have to submit an environmental impact assessments, license applications, permit amendments. They don't have enough water. And to restart, they plan to restart a 10th mine in 2023, production 1.5 million ton. Well, excuse me, after 2 years, it's over. So how real are the other tons? And then Grand Cache CST underground, Willem referred to it. It's just a swing mine, on and off surface mine operation. It has some reasonably good coal, but they developed quality and resource problems as they mined it out. So at present, Alberta has 30 billion abandoned mine liabilities compared to 2 billion in remediation funds. And Ian will explain later, probably this damage is a lot higher. We don't want to go there. Just a cautionary tale from Northeast British Columbia. You see all the orange where all the mines shut down again and again. This is Western Canadian Coal. It was these 3 mines. They were bought by Walter in 2011, went bankrupt in 2011, bought by Kunuma. They were swing mines, closing and opening due to low market prices and quality issues. And they were closed a third of the mine, and they had net business losses of $1 billion over this time period. They're incompatible with the Elk Valley mines. So again, you've got all these promises by Benga and these 3 mines in the Northeast, corporate tax, but they overpromised nearly 3 times. Employment, overpromised nearly twice. Coal production, overpromised 2.5 times. And all this infrastructure of these mines in that area, not only these 3, were subsidized by BC government to the tune of, I heard, $2 billion. And then in 2018-19, Kunuma paid 225 million dividends to shareholders. And in October 2020, Kunuma received 120 million from the Canadian emergency funding. So there's no economic gain for BC, no job security. This is typically what the swing mine is and what Alberta is setting itself up for. So the conclusions are, Benga overstated the quality and market value of Grassy Mountain. The quality is tier 2 products, inferior to Elk Valley's prime hard coking coals. The product quality will rapidly decline after initial production years, and the coal pricing on the national market is highly volatile. And there's lots of downward pressure on it too. And Grassy Mountain's product quality decline is likely to generate inadequate cash flow after year 10, if not earlier. It's advisable to consider the impact of Benga entering bankruptcy around year 10 of project life, potentially leaving a 48 million gap between the mine financial security asset to liability program and cleanup costs. And there, basically, a mine that's bankrupt, you can put its esteemed value still at that time against the cleanup cost, but it has no value, it's shut down. It's the same thing as what happens with our abandoned drill holes. So Benga is unable to properly predict, monitor, and mitigate or remediate environmental impacts of the project. And it refused to produce a complete environmental impact assessment. And many reclamation projects are likely to be unfinished or proven not to work, because many of them, they let them start for the last years of the mine project life after, say, 18 years. Well, it's just too late. Will it be there still? And referring to the track record of the BC Northeast mines, Grassy Mountain is unlikely to provide significant tax and royalty revenues, and consistent employment at the levels projected by Benga. Again, refer to Grand Cache CST mine, a swing mine in West Central Alberta, similar issues, only producing when market prices are sufficient. It's not the COVID that shut it down. So if you have another look, last slide, Mont and Chinook, overall product quality north and south of Coleman, is unlikely to exceed Benga's product quality and market value. Tent Mountain Mine's Tier 2 product quality and market value will be inferior to the Elk Valley hard coal products. And they're speculative projects. Penny stock, if you see Alberta's Eastern Slope mining projects, Montem on the Australian Stock Exchange were 14.5 cents just last Friday, and they're down from 25 cents the end of January. Atrum, the shares were 25 cents when trading halted since 9th of February. They've just halted trading altogether and suspended from trading. 11th of February, down from 30 cents. Nothing's happening. The underwriters that guarantee financial project, they terminated their agreement. They pulled the plug just last week. So the impact of mining on the Rockies Eastern Slope watershed is reduced polluted water flow, should be weighed against Alberta's high dependence on the irrigation sector. Irrigation for us is $3.6 billion for the Alberta's GDP, including sales and processing, of which $1 billion from the Oldman River Basin, which is directly impacted by grassy Montem and also Atrum, which was grassy north. Then Alberta's government's proposal is to increase the allocation of Oldman River Basin water for its industrial use from 14 to say 64%. It's a cross-border issue because we have agreements with Saskatchewan and Manitoba for water security. So how will they get their water? There's millions of people dependent on this water. And then you've got the tourism revenues as referred to by Willem. Later, I've also got links where you can get all this information, which I used for these presentations. So thank you very much for listening to this.
Thank you, Cornelis. That's a lot of food for thought that you've given us. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of follow-up questions during the panel. So I'm now going to invite our next speaker, someone who I know very well, Dr. Ian Urquhart. He's AWA's Conservation Director and a Professor Emeritus in Political Science at the University of Alberta. In 2018, University of Toronto Press published his book, Costly Fix, Power, Politics, and Nature in the Tar Sands. And Ian's going to be talking to us about coal and royalties. So feel free to take it away, Ian, and share your screen.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Grace. Just give me a minute here to see if I can do this the way I thought I could. So let's see. We'll share that. Okay. And so does that look good, Grace? I mean, is it?
We currently see the
5 and
presenter
9,
view.
yeah. Oh, you're seeing the whole thing?
Yeah, we're seeing all of your
Okay.
slides at once.
Okay, all right. And you're getting the things that I was going to talk to in terms of the slides as well?
Yep.
Like the notes? Okay.
Yeah, if
All
you want
right,
to end show and restart, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll do that. Okay. Sorry about that, everyone. End show. So end. Okay. All right. So we'll just play from the start then. Okay. That look
good.
better?
Yes, thanks, Ian.
Mind you, now I have no crutch to lean on now. So this is, and the worst part of that was my time clock. So now I'm going to have to figure out something else here for that. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thanks very much for participating in this evening's town hall on the economics of coal. What I thought, as you might suggest, or you might infer from the title of my presentation, I don't think we're getting much for what the coal companies are aspiring to do to the Rockies and the foothills of Alberta. I think that when it comes to something like royalties, we're getting pennies for the resource wealth that exists out there. And I think if you're going to try to make a case for the positive case for these sorts of developments, I think it has to be an economic one. It certainly isn't an ecological one. And to that extent, what I'd like to do tonight is take a critical look at just one aspect of the economic argument, and that's the royalties. And that's the royalties that coal companies such as Benga Mining, if the Grassy project goes ahead, will pay to the government of Alberta for the right to exploit and mine coal in the foothills of the Rockies. So what I want to do tonight is say a few things about what a royalty is, just a little bit of a definitional exercise there. Then I want to look at coal royalties in Alberta, BC, and Queensland and just do a comparison of the royalties in those jurisdictions. Then I want to give you Benga's case for what it proposes it will deliver to the province of Alberta, to US taxpayers in royalties through its Grassy Mountain Coal project. And then I want to end by questioning two assumptions that are behind Benga's estimates. And the first of those assumptions you've already heard tonight, and that's the one that has to do with coal quality. So when it comes to what is a royalty, you know, it's the price that a resource owner charges developers. So it's the price that the government of Alberta on your behalf charges a company for the right to exploit public resource, okay, such as coal, such as tar sands. Those would be examples. To simplify what the royalty systems can look like, I've suggested here there's a distinction to be made between a gross royalty system and a net royalty system. The latter is set on net revenue, company revenue after certain costs have been deducted from revenues. But the gross one is the one I have an example for here. So in a coal mining example, let's imagine that our imaginary coal mine is going to produce 1 million tons of coal a year. And let's imagine that the price it's going to get for that coal is 175 Canadian a ton, which today's exchange rate is 140 US, which is a number that Benga uses. So they're going to generate, in terms of gross revenues, they're going to generate $175 million. So now let's say, all right, a royalty is a percentage of that 175 million. Well, for argument's sake, let's set it at something ridiculously low, like, oh, so I'm editorializing. Let's set it at something ridiculously low, like 1%. So of that $175 million, 1%, 1.75 million, will go to the provincial treasury. Okay. So another term that comes up in discussions of royalties is payout. And this is the point in a project where the proponent, the builder of the mine, has recovered its costs. And sometimes then royalty systems will be structured in a way that will have a pre-payout structure and a post-payout structure. And generally, the more lenient structure would be the structure that exists before a mine reaches the payout point. Okay, so next, here we go. Come on. Okay, so here we've got coal royalty rates in Alberta, BC, and in Queensland in Australia. And there are two general messages that I'm trying to use this particular material to get across to you. And one is that the ridiculously low rate I suggested of 1%, that's the norm. I mean, when it comes to natural resources in Canada and the provinces charging royalties for the use of resources, the norm is to charge very low royalties. So, and why do governments do this? I mean, I think governments have done this historically in Canada because their view of resource management is that the primary goal when it comes to exploiting resources is to create jobs in the extractive sectors of the economy, to create jobs in the primary production sectors of the economy. And so consequently, they're not interested in receiving more money from companies for the right to exploit the resource because they're interested in the jobs they think will be generated from this. So 1%, so in the pre-payout case in Alberta, it's like the situation I described in the previous slide. It would be 1% of mine mouth revenue, 1% of gross revenue is what the Treasury would receive from a mining company in that pre-payout phase. And then it goes up. It goes up once post-payout is realized. You can say the same thing taking place in British Columbia as well. So in my view, these royalty rates are very low. And as I say, they don't really put a lot of value in the economic rent that can be generated from producing something like coal or something like turning tar sands into crude oil. The other thing that I think that the other reason I wanted to, the other message I wanted to get across with this particular slide is that there is, I think, a significant difference between coal royalty rates in Alberta and what's being charged in the most important coal producing jurisdiction in the planet, and that being Queensland in Australia. And so in Queensland, as opposed to the 1%, they have a 7% royalty, which can become more than 7% depending on the price of coal. Okay, so bitumen, coal, and Alberta's finances. So let me start off. So the message I want to try to convey here is a message about, well, what is developing coal, exploiting coal going to do for Alberta's treasury? I mean, what are the benefits in terms of royalties that are going to accrue to Albertans as a consequence of this particular style of development and focus of development? Now, qualification to begin with, the contribution is to some extent understated that I'm going to be talking about here, because I'm only looking at royalties. I'm not looking at corporate income tax. So if Benga does make any money, I'm not looking at whatever that income tax they would be paying on their income. I'm not looking at the personal income taxes that miners and others working for a company like Benga would be paying to government. And there are several significant differences that I want to highlight in this comparison I'm making between bitumen on the one hand and coal on the other hand. And the first significant difference leaps out at you, I would guess, and that is $4 billion, just over $4 billion was collected in bitumen royalties versus $217 million collected through coal royalties. So that's, I mean, in my world, that's a pretty significant difference in terms of the amount of revenue that's generated from those two, exploiting those two commodities, the very significant difference in what's going to go into the treasury. But I wanted to present it this way to highlight an even more important difference in my view, and that is that $4 billion in bitumen was gathered and accrued, went into the treasury in one fiscal year. That's what went into the treasury in the 2019-2020 fiscal year. The $217 million figure is a sum. That is the sum of 11 years of coal royalties in Alberta from 2008-9 through to 2018-2019. Okay. So that's not what is generated in 1 year in Alberta. That is what was generated over 11 years for an average of $19.7 million a year. In 1 year, we actually had to pay back over $2 million to the coal producers in Alberta because we collected, quote unquote, too much from them for in terms of royalties. I start to get angry, and that's not a good thing for the timekeeping. So anyways, I will try to contain myself. So here's a statement. So why are we doing this? So here's a statement that came from Minister Savage when she rescinded the coal policy, now reinstated, when she rescinded the coal policy in May of last year. And what she's stressing in this statement is it's really important that we grow export coal production, that we want to export metallurgical coal. This is a good thing. Why? I mean, what makes it a good thing? Is it the 385 jobs that will be created arguably when Grassy Mountain goes ahead? Is that why we're doing it? Because we're certainly not doing it to generate much revenue. Okay. I mean, anyways, it's just the numbers don't lie. when it comes to that. There is little to no money in terms of royalties from the coal industry. But Benga says, and I'll put this word into their mouth, I mean, Benga says they're going to change that. I mean, yes, we're going to change this trend. They claim in this particular, these are numbers that come from their material that they presented to the Joint Review Panel hearing on the Grassy Mountain mine. And they want you to focus on that middle column, the $140 US a ton, which they claim, and I think Cornelis and Willem both, Cornelis more explicitly, has raised questions about whether they can get $140 US a ton. They claim that in this scenario, that's their preferred scenario. That's the one they think that is most likely, that they will generate 30 million a year in royalties for 23 years and 690 million over the life of the mine. I don't know, I was pretty good in math, but I mean, calculus drove me crazy, but I don't know if I needed calculus to try to figure this stuff out, but it's hard for me to get to $30 million a year in terms of an average annual amount that's going to come from Benga. And part of it is just sort of doing like what I think would happen in the first year of the operation. And that is, you know, Benga's mine is designed to produce 4.5 million tons of coal a year. And let's assume they get their 140 US a ton, which is 175 Canadian. So we do that math, we get $785 million gross revenue. And then they're going to be charged the 1% royalty on that. So they're going to pay $7.85 million to the government in that year, in that pre-payout year of production. It just becomes difficult for me to see the circumstances in which we're going to get well above $30 a ton, or pardon me, $30 million a year in royalty payments to, you know, to average out at $30 million a year. Okay, here's where I'd like to sort of chip away at two of Benga's assumptions, and I'll just simply refer you back to what both Willem and Cornelis said earlier, and that is that when it comes to coal quality, Benga's assumptions about price may well fall victim to the fact that their quality of coal is not as good as they tell people it is. And because it's not as good as coal in the Elk Valley or the premium hard coking coal in Australia, they're not going to be able to get the premium pricing that they talked about during a hearing like the Grassy Mountain hearing. So that's one of their assumptions that I think is that Cornelis and Willem have really raised important questions about this evening. The second one was alluded to in Willem's comments. I don't know whether Chris is going to talk about when he talks about decarbonization, if he's going to deal with this. But the other thing about the price assumption here is that they assume there's going to be a strong demand for coking coal. And that strong demand for coking coal is going to sustain prices. It's going to support the global prices for seaborne coal. But what's really important to recognize here is that steelmakers recognize the importance of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The World Steel Association acknowledges that they produce, in 2018, they produced 8% of global emissions. They also acknowledge that environment and climate change is the most important issue, their words, not mine, the most important issue that they're going to struggle with in this century, in the 21st century. And I think for that reason, when you look at coal forecasts, coal production forecasts from an organization like the International Energy Agency, you see data that confirms the path that Willem and Cornelis were talking about. So when you look at their the last economic World Economic Outlook they produced, predicted a significant decline in coking coal production in the medium term. Looking at 2019 to 2030, they were calling for, what is that, an 18 to 34% decline in global coking coal production by 1930, or pardon me, by 2030. Going out to 2040, a 25 to 53% reduction in production over that period of time. So I think, I think there are good reasons and good reasons that are coming from very credible actors like the World Steel Association and the International Energy Agency, that should lead us to really question the story that the likes of Benga were trying to tell us about what they're going to do for the province of Alberta when it comes to the economic side of this. I think both the coal quality and coal production really conspires against Benga's assumptions. So where I want to leave tonight is with this. So here's a shot of the old watershed in the Old Man. So what are we willing to sell this for? I mean, are we willing to sell it for 30 million a year over 23 years, assuming that Benga survives for 23 years? Or when Cornelis talks about how the price assumptions aren't nearly as high as companies like Benga would like them to be, are we looking at $6 million a year when coal prices are around 100 US a ton? Or alternatively, here's a crazy idea for you. Is it priceless? I mean, is that a priceless setting, a priceless environment? And so, it leads me to ask if anything less than a total prohibition on coal mining in the Rockies and foothills, is anything less than that acceptable? And I think I know what my answer to that is, and it's no. So anyways, thank you very much for your attention this evening. I like Cornelis, I have some references in the back of my presentation that I'm more than happy to share with you. And thanks very much.
Thanks, Ian. That was fantastic. I think the further we get into these presentations, the more I'm seeing there's a lot more data and information than we've just seen on the surface with the proposals. So next, I am going to invite our final speaker, Chris Severson-Baker. He's the Alberta Regional Director at the Pembina Institute. Chris's 25-year career has focused on advancing solutions to complex environmental challenges facing Canada and its energy sector. He is based out of Calgary, Alberta, and Chris is going to be talking to us about coal and water and some pretty important trade-offs. So feel free to share your screen, Chris, and take it away.
Thank you, Grace. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just great.
Okay. I'm going to do it this way. All right. So, well, thank you very much for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to everybody, and thanks for taking time out of your evening to learn about what's happening in terms of coal mining in Alberta. I'm really impressed with the work that the AWA and others are doing to raise awareness about the trade-offs here, and so I was really grateful for the opportunity to contribute in a small way to that. So I'm going to talk about the trade-off and the future of coal for steelmaking in a carbon-constrained world. I'm going to argue that it doesn't make sense to trade intact upper watershed areas for long-term coal mining jobs, when we know that global action on climate change will push down the long-term demand for coal and steelmaking, and especially when we don't use coal as an input in Alberta for anything else. There's no other uses for this coal. We collect virtually no royalties, as Ian pointed out, and with population growth and with climate change, the sort of the intrinsic value of areas that we have that are intact in the eastern slopes are only going to become greater, and the water will only become more valuable, and with climate change potentially more scarce, which of course would increase its value to us as well. So a little bit about the Pembina Institute. Very quickly, we're a national organization with 2 offices in Alberta, Calgary and Edmonton. We're a think tank. Our focus is on helping while holding governments accountable to achieving carbon neutral by 2050. So our organization has worked on all kinds of different issues over the years. Always energy and climate change has always been very prominent. We've become very focused on the issue of climate change over the last few years. And it's a pretty big challenge, and that's our focus. This slide sort of shows kind of some of the things that we're working on. You can see that do a lot of work on oil and gas, but also clean electricity, transport and green buildings. Here in Alberta, where our focus is really on industrial decarbonization and electricity and oil and gas. Well, you can see that what we're not working on here is coal mining in Alberta. While we'll likely turn our attention in the coming years to the steelmaking sector in Canada and the environmental impacts associated with that, we're not likely to have the resources to dedicate more to metallurgical coal mining in Alberta. But it is something that we worked on in the past. So I should mention that we did work on shifting away from coal for power generation. And Alberta has really been successful there. We're ahead of schedule. Coal for thermal power will be phased out in around 5 years. And that sort of shows that a lot can happen fairly quickly. That was some years ago, that was thought to be an unrealistic goal, but it's within sight now. So Pembina used to work on coal mining. In fact, one of my first assignments at Pembina when I was in my early 20s or mid 20s was to represent the Pembina Institute at the Cheviot coal mine hearing in 96, 97. I was fresh out of environmental sciences at the U of A. I had no experience with regulatory proceedings or coal mining or anything else really for that matter. And I was tasked with reviewing the application and the environmental impact assessment and presenting Pembina's views at the hearing, and thankfully I was able to be taken under the wing by Diane Pahal, who some people may know used to be with Alberta Wilderness Association way back then. She was she guided me through this whole process, and she was a great mentor. And I took a lot of the stuff that I learned from working with Diane into the hearings for some of the oil sands projects later in my career. I also I worked with Mike Sawyer, who some people may know, Kerry Bruin, Connie Brezhnehan, and stayed at Rocky Notness's house up there. So it was a pretty sort of formative experience in my career. Ultimately, we weren't successful really, and we were seeking to make the case, the same kind of case that we're making today. But the mine did go ahead, and I I do remember going to the my wife and I went hiking in the area where the mine would be after the hearings were over, and it was pretty emotional, and haven't been back since. And I think that's people tend not to go back to areas that have become industrialized. And so it's not a great way of attracting tourism and other land uses to the eastern slopes. So a couple of takeaways from the Cheviot mine experience that I think are still very valid today, and we've been talking about that in the other presentations, is that the global metallurgical coal market is extremely competitive. Alberta is a relatively high cost of source of metallurgical coal, and can be among the first to become uneconomic. And Cornelius talked about the swing mines and how and it's very disruptive to those communities and to the workers that are trying to make a living at those types of facilities when that happens. Regulators are reluctant to impose environmental protections and reclamation guarantees because they recognize that this drives up the cost of mining. And so when we were at the Cheviot mine, and we thought we were making a very valid case for at least, if you're going to go ahead with this mine, employ different measures for managing to try and protect against selenium leaching into the water, or better monitoring and so on. And we really found that there isn't a lot of room there for any kind of improvement in that way, because the regulators are very concerned about driving up the cost of the project, because that would make the project uneconomic in the longer term. What I've since learned, from living and working in Alberta for the Pembina Institute, but I also worked for the Alberta Energy Regulator for 3 years, is that in circumstances where the government does not support a project, that they can regulate the project to death simply by putting in place a number of conditions that make the project uneconomic. And we've seen that, when sour gas wells were proposed for too close to Calgary, the regulator didn't say, you can't drill a well there. They said you can drill a well there, but you have to do these list of a million things first, and the project never went ahead. So I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. Right now, the government's very supportive of developing mines for coal mining, but that could change, and that's one way that they might express their views. So again, we've talked about some of these things already in some of the other presentations. Right now, the government does support metallurgical coal mining in Alberta. Global action will push down the long-term demand for coal and steelmaking, and it could start to happen fairly dramatically even in the next 10 years. There's no alternative use for metallurgical coal. The jobs are temporary. We have virtually zero royalties. There's a risk of early closure. There's a risk of reclamation liabilities, and water is valuable and renewable if managed carefully. So I'm going to talk a bit more about the global action aspect and the liabilities aspect in the coming slides here. So the metallurgical coal mining in a carbon constrained world. So we've entered into a different phase of climate action globally. For many years, there was a lot of talk about climate change, a lot of awareness raising, a lot of government pledges to reduce emissions, but ultimately there was not the sort of the political will to do what was necessary, and we're starting to see that changing. We're the company or countries that have committed to a net zero target now include China, the European Union, Japan, South Korea, as well as Canada and other countries. And the Biden administration has really made a significant impact with in its first few days, changing the tone on how it's going to deal with the issue of climate change. And so we've got the corporate sector starting to make commitments. We've got the steel sector itself starting to make commitments. So, for example, Volkswagen and Toyota have a goal of eliminating carbon emissions from their entire value chain. Steel-making companies have made pledges to be net zero by 2050 as well. And so what we're going to start to see, I think, is increased awareness amongst the public about the greenhouse gas emissions associated with such things as cement, concrete, steel, and they're going to start to exert their influence over municipal levels of government, provincial levels of government, federal government around procurement of those products. So I don't think it'll be too long before you'll start to be hearing on the news that, there's a group of climate activists in Calgary who are questioning the city's decision about where it sourced its cement and concrete for, an overpass. And there'll be pressure across Canada on municipal level of government and ultimately on the corporate sector to demonstrate that they are in fact decarbonizing their supply chain. And that's going to have an impact on the demand for metallurgical coal. So the metallurgical coal industry is going to need to respond by demonstrating that it is producing steel. The steel industry is going to have to demonstrate that it's going to be producing steel that has a lower carbon intensity in order to meet the demands of the market. And the way to do that, and we've already covered this ground tonight as well, is to shift away from using metallurgical coal to start to increase the use of hydrogen and other methods. And when we sort of look at the technologies out there, there's no really easy way of producing the kind of amazing amounts of heat and whatnot that these facilities require. But there are ways to do it without resulting in emissions of CO2 to the same degree. And a lot of those solutions involve avoiding the use of metallurgical coal in the first place. So moving on then to the liabilities. I'm going to move through these slides very quickly, but this has to be a concern of Albertans. Whenever we hear about the prospect of a mining project maybe becoming uneconomic, because of the highly competitive market for metallurgical coal, or because the demand for the product might decline over time and there really is no other use for that product. Because we already have a lot of problems with liabilities in Alberta. We have just a phenomenal number of inactive wells and abandoned wells. Of course, that's been in the news lately. And what we're starting to realize is that there really there just isn't the sort of the political will to impose the kinds of requirements on companies that would result in these liabilities being addressed. There's a desire to leave cash in the hands of companies in the hopes that they'll continue to explore and drill and that sort of thing. And it's resulting in a very concerning a level of liabilities in the province. The same can be said for the oil sands, where we've seen the tailings ponds grow and grow over time to the point where it's just vast lakes of tailings literally in that area. And we're only now starting to grapple with the reality of what it means to dewater those and to try to convert that into some kind of a stable landscape that won't require management for a very long time. We've also only just started to scratch the surface when it comes to reclaiming land that has been mined for the oil sands. And so this one dot of reclaimed land relative to all these other areas that have been mined may be greater now because this is a 2016 figure, but you get the idea that we've got a long way to go. And of course, you know, we're seeing all kinds of consolidation in the oil and gas sector right now and in the oil sands, and the future demand for oil is looking very, very weak, and so again we have to be concerned about liabilities from the sector as well, and the cost of cleaning that up is dramatic. The Alberta Energy Regulator estimated that it was 260 billion. They didn't intend for that number to be made public, but it's a number that they were working with, trying to raise awareness within government about the what was at stake. So then, this is my last slide. But so again, you know, all of this really the trade-off is water, and it's intact watersheds and wilderness areas. So we know that we've already over-allocated our water resources in many areas of Alberta. Water is renewable, of course, but it's likely to decline in the face of global warming and climate change. Regardless of what happens in terms of climate change, its value will increase over time as the population grows, and as other uses of water grow, and as we realize the value of water in the natural environment as well. And so this is an asset that will be around in the long run, long after the coal mining jobs are gone, even if the mine does operate for its entire timeline, which is unlikely. And you know, these areas are valued by people. People want to live and recreate in those types of areas, or simply just look at them from a distance. And so when we think about what diversification for Alberta looks like, we need to think about, you know, what makes Alberta attractive as a place for a company to set up an office or to host a facility, you know. And it's not resource extraction, it's the natural environment and clean air, clean water, access to healthcare, education. And I think our Alberta government is starting to recognize that that these values are actually what represents the future for the Alberta economy in the long run. But of course, we still have a sort of a mentality in Alberta where, you know, if times are tough, we need to figure out how we can attract, you know, the extractive resources to come and develop the resources. And you know, I think one of the things we could get into the discussion perhaps is, you know, what are some of the worldviews that aren't being represented in these presentations tonight, and how likely is it that that some of the views could shift amongst the government? I actually think that we're seeing lots of evidence that that our current government is rethinking some of its initial priorities and is actually willing to change course. The most recent example of that was ending the dispute with doctors over the pay increase, and even going so far as to say that they regret going down that road in the first place. So I think anything is possible, and it's worth sort of exploring that idea a bit further. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. That's a good, hopeful note to kind of wrap up our presentations and bring us into our panel discussion. So I'm going to welcome back all of our presenters, Willem, Cornelis, Chris, if you want to hang on, and turn on your cameras, everyone. That would be great. And we're going to start getting into the many questions which have been asked throughout the evening. So I'm going to start with one that I saw coming up a few times, and starting with from Teiko. Who asked, there are quite a few, if and when the Grassy Mountain Coal Project is approved, if it's approved, and if it becomes operational, there are presumably going to be significant restoration and reclamation costs for that mine. So, what is in place? Is there some kind of an escrow? What are the reclamation fees that are in place in order to protect taxpayers from the burden of those costs? And so I might pass this first to Chris, and then open it up to our other presenters. And on top of this, a bit of a question, if there are, an idea of a typical reclamation bond, do you have any thoughts on that cost, and is it enough? Is it worth it?
Okay, I'll try. I don't have a lot of specifics about this particular application and what the requirements would be for this specific application. But in general, I mean, we haven't required companies to put up front the whole entire cost of reclamation. And so if there's a problem and the project is cut short, we've seen with mines that the companies will simply tell the government that we just don't have the resources to do what we said we were going to do at the beginning. And we're seeing lots of examples of that with individual oil and gas operations today. And so that is the risk, right? That you either end up with a partially completed mine site where the value of the mine itself doesn't represent a significant amount of value. You can't sort of sell the equipment or sell the asset and use that money to reclaim the site, and so then you're having to either manage it as it is or reclaim it using taxpayer funding.
If I could just add to that then, Grace, and Cornelis, you should jump in too, because I think I heard you mention the differential between what the estimated cost of reclamation is with Grassy Mountain at year 10 with what Benga proposes to put up at that point in time. So one of the documents that was filed during the Grassy Mountain hearing was a document by Benga that said at year 10, they estimated the reclamation total liability to be $61.2 million. And they would put up, at that point in time, they would be required to put up 12.24 million at that point in time. So I thought, Cornelis, when you were talking about $48 million, that might have been the difference that you were talking about there between them. Companies don't do this, but they do. I shouldn't say they don't, but I think there are very few companies who do take advantage of the fact that under the program, you could put up the entire reclamation cost if you wanted to at the very beginning of your project, but I would suspect few companies have done that. If you want to do some research on it, Google Mine Financial Security Program, because that's what the provincial program is that deals with oil sands mines and coal mines. And you can see the amounts of money that different companies like Teck, for example, have already put up for cleaning up their Cardinal River coal operations. I think, and Chris mentioned this, the danger is, or a danger is, two dangers, are the reclamation costs estimated properly. So for instance, if there's a selenium problem that arises out of Grassy Mountain, are their estimates of what it will take to clean that up going to be sufficient to do that, to do the job? When you're looking at Teck spending hundreds of millions of dollars in the Elk Valley to try to deal with that, that might be a question you want to keep in your mind about the amounts of money that companies are required to put up. And then the other issue is simply bankruptcy. these companies are structured as limited liability companies, which means that even though the principal behind Benga and behind Riversdale is Gina Reinhart, the richest person in Australia, and Hancock Prospecting, her company, because Benga and Riversdale are limited liability companies, you can't go after Hancock for reclamation costs. So they will, as Chris, I think, alluded to, will taxpayers at the end of the day be required to pay that?
Yeah, I think that, Ian, you've hit many of the highlights here. It's very hard to estimate the reclamation cost as it is. The $48 million is from the final rebuttal of the different CPAWs in their final answer to Benga recently. But the big thing is, how do you capture the selenium? Because I've got many colleagues, now ex-colleagues, working in the Elk Valley, and they recall how they played around with the area with all these interesting orange and red, streams coming from these mines in that area, not only the Grassy Mountain mine. And this can continue for decades. Now, Teck has spent $750 million up till now and counting to solve the selenium problem, and they're not yet totally out of the woods there. And these companies like Benga and Montem, they won't be around that long. They won't be around for decades after the mine shut down, and they won't put up the money up front to even start addressing this problem. And there's many questions. You can run a plant to take out selenium, but you need people to run it for a few decades. Then you can do saturated rock fill and try to let the water flow through waste rock so nobody has to touch it. There's all sorts of questions because it might get clogged in between the rocks because of sediment. There's growth of algae, other organisms. Will it indeed be able to function without us touching it for 80 years? And then they took, they've got surge ponds, and they took the rainfall from Pincher Creek, which is much less. You don't have these big surges coming through, especially spring thawing and the June rains, and they're just not large enough to catch that. So then it will end up in the streams. Then there was a slope stability assessment done, also questioned during the hearing, and the slopes have quite high likelihood to fail. There's also some of these are close to farms or even to Blairmore. And then the question was, yeah, but this dam is under-designed, we assume. And then what if it fails? What will happen to Blairmore? Oh no, that won't happen. The chance it happens is so small. But by the way, these slopes are unstable. And these surges will happen, especially with climate change. We're going to drought, but you've got these massive surges. So, and then I said, well, then you'll find a solution. With all these issues, there are many holes in Benga's presentation. It will be adaptive management. Well, give me a break. Yeah, Benga is a shell company of Riversdale, which is a shell company of Hancock. And if they go under in 10 years, they'll just walk away, guys. There's no value left, there's damage. There's a hole in the ground for Alberta. Can't be more clear.
Thank you, Cornelis. So I'm going to move on to our next question. This one might be for Willem or any of our presenters. Would the removal of coal seams in the Crow's Nest Pass constitute what our government is calling mountaintop removal? And I think this is a really timely question based on the reinstatement of the coal policy and these questions, follow-up questions that have come up around what does mountaintop removal really mean, and do any of these projects actually constitute mountaintop removal under their definition? So Willem, do you have any comments on that?
So you saw the picture of Grassy Mountain. Well, that's what they're certainly going to take that mountain down. That's mountaintop removal. But also another thing I was just thinking about is, and I've mentioned it before to people, the planning is so poorly. The coal loadout is just upstream from Blairmore, and it's that the coal dust will be flying through the powder keg. Nobody will be skiing. You can't ski there because of the coal dust on that. You will be skiing on the Black Slope, and like Grand Cache is 20 kilometers away from. They planned it properly in the 60s when that Grand Clash, it's away from the coal loadout, and Fort McMurray is 30 kilometers away from where the mining is, so people can live there. But actually, this Benga mine is just doing that loadout right up upwind from Blairmore. It's a terrible plan. And I don't see why the people are supporting it. Well, Monica Field certainly doesn't, but and other people in the Crossness Pass, but
Yeah.
it's poor.
Yeah, and if I may add, it's semantics, it's wordplay. So mountaintop removal, yes or no? Mountaintop removal in the Appalachians is defined, they've got horizontal seams. So just take the cap of the mountain to access the seam. That's it. But here you've got open pit mines like bench mine. So you make a big crater like Tent Mountain. You see these pictures of Tent Mountain all over the place. It's a big crater in the heart of the mountain, but you leave part of the mountain standing. So now all of a sudden it's not mountaintop removal. I don't buy this, guys. Sorry.
Yeah, certainly Grassy Mountain is mountaintop removal. That mountain is going to go, the Grassy Mountain.
Yeah.
Just a couple points really quickly on this. I mean, I agree, Willem, it is Grassy is mountaintop removal. But when you read what Minister Savage's directive said to the Alberta Energy Regulator, what she said was no mountaintop removal mining on Category 2 lands. And so Grassy as being on Category 4 lands, the Chinook project that Montam would like to do after Tent Mountain, although these are mountaintop removal mines, they are on Category 4 lands, and as such, they were essentially excluded altogether from what the minister said. She did say one thing in her press conference, but the directive says something else, and whether that was intentional or not, I don't know. But it's certainly there. She said no mountaintop removal mining, but the directive is more specific than that.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks, everyone. I think it speaks to the point that Cornelis made about semantics. What are we really talking about? Because, the public could interpret mountaintop removal in one way, meaning don't touch the tops of the mountains, don't carve out an entire mountain in order to make a mine, but then it's being defined completely differently. So the next question I'm going to address to everyone quite broadly, but it's been talked about throughout the presentations. How is Benga justifying this project? You've talked about the numbers to say it isn't justifiable, but that means that they must be looking at something differently in order to say, okay, well, we're going to benefit from this. Ian, do you want to start us off?
Can you repeat that again for me, Grace? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah, how is Benga looking at the numbers differently? If you're presenting all of this information to say that the cost simply isn't justifiable, what numbers were they presenting through the hearings, and through their proposals to justify the cost?
It's a good question, and I don't, like in reading the transcripts of the hearing. So, for example, one set of legal counsel went after Benga to simply say, look, I mean, you're claiming that your royalties are going to be 3 times what all of the mines in Alberta paid in a particular year. How can you suggest that? I mean, where's your evidence to support that? And my recollection of the transcripts is there isn't a lot of evidence that comes back on that. So in that particular case, what Gary Houston of Benga tried to do was suggest that there was a difference in quality of coal, going back, and so go back where Cornelis started, and that was with the difference between thermal and metallurgical coal. Benga's people at the hearings tried to argue that, oh, well, what you're confusing here are royalties that'll be paid for thermal coal as well and lumping them in with those for metallurgical coal. I think that wasn't true. And I think I think there's evidence there that suggests he wasn't true, but that is the type of argument that they made on the royalty side of things, is just that, I'm sorry, Madam Lawyer, but your information is incorrect because you're not taking coal quality into consideration. But I think when you actually do take the time to look closely at it, you'll see that the lawyer was absolutely right in questioning what Benga was saying about it.
And also, it's all about the shareholder game, spinning the shares. Yeah, look at the example I gave what happened in Mozambique. Yeah, you try to find someone who doesn't do his homework, like Rio Tinto. You sell it for a few $1 billion, you walk away. And then these same guys sold it to Gina Reinhardt, yeah, to the iron ore company so you just try to flip it. And then you've got bonuses of the executives and options. That's the game. It's not to produce coal. There are mines like that also which failed in BC.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. An approval for a coal mine is a valuable asset on the balance sheet, and you know, whether it ever gets developed or not, if it gets partly developed, you know, and the best coal is extracted and then it's closed, you know, again, that's value. A mine that's sitting there waiting to go, if the price of the commodity goes way up, is it an asset as well? So, I mean, these are not the sort of the way that these types of projects are described to Albertans, but that's the way corporations will view these assets. And I'd also like to mention, comment a little bit on sort of like the worldview that maybe supports the, you know, prioritizing coal and coal mining jobs ahead of a watershed. And then I think partly what we're seeing there is you know, there's you know, some folks in Alberta would sort of see that coal as having a limited shelf life, right? Like if the world actually does take action on climate change, it's not going to have any value in the future. And so some folks would sort of like to make sure that we develop it and get some value for it before it's not worth anything at all. And I think, you know, that's kind of been the approach with our oil and gas resources in recent years. And the other thing is that some folks may be very skeptical about climate change itself, or skeptical about the ability of the humans on this planet to actually get organized and do something about climate change. And so they may be banking on the world failing to act on climate change, and or maybe failing to address greenhouse gas emissions in the steel sector at least, right? So then there is a market for the commodity in the long term, and the jobs will be there. But you know, I think it's, you know, that worldview is starting to shift even, you know, in Alberta, and we've got you know, a number of folks that think that, but I think the you know, that is starting to change. And I think that when you immediately, when you step outside of the Alberta bubble, you realize that people simply aren't thinking that way about the need to address climate change at all anymore globally.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for that.
I think our
Sure.
government is seeing that, and Jason Kenney certainly sees that. He sees an opportunity actually in there, and he's asking Pierre Trudeau now for $30 billion for carbon capture and storage, and that's a big concern. I think, well, it's certainly bigger than this coal mining, even this carbon capture and storage, that the whole world is going to think that's going to be the solution. And we as geologists know that it's not going to work. It's going to leak out, and you've wasted your money, and it's tremendously expensive. The oil companies are not going to pay for it. So that's why Kenny is asking the federal government for $30 billion off the hat straight away.
Thanks, Willem. You make a good point too about carbon capture, and about, you know, do we want to make sure that this isn't a Band-Aid solution either, that we're putting a lot of money into technologies for carbon capture while at the same time we're not addressing the source. So I'm going to throw another question out there. This one I think is for Cornelis from Mary. Where do the volatiles from making coke go?
Okay, so these volatiles, you can different things. It depends where you've got your coke plant, what the value is of the volatiles. So in the simple case, you've got an oven, and you burn all the volatiles in the oven. There's a heat exchanger on top of the oven. You make steam, you make electricity. And you do this when the electricity has a good value. Yeah. Then on the other hand, when you get your volatiles, you can also catch them and you can wash them. You can get methane gas. methane gas you can use in your steel plant, but you can also sell to the power station next door for a good bit of money. Then as you clean up in the gas treatment plant your coke oven gas, you get light oils. They have a market value. And then you've got tar. This is the lowest value of all, but it has a market value. So depending where you are, what the market wants, you can either burn your byproducts, make electricity directly, or make your methane gas to use in the plant, also make electricity, and then your tars and light oils to sell to the industry. And you can see different areas, say of Brazil, where in one area south of Rio, they burn all the gas, make electricity, but up north, they make byproducts in a new plant, CSP, in the northern part of Brazil, where Holland used to have a colony. So it's just, it depends on the market. There was a big push in China to make electricity, but now they also make more and more byproducts. So it changes. And it also depends on the coal. In the part where you burn all your byproducts, if you've got lower quality coal, you can cook it a bit longer, bake it a bit longer in the oven, so you can use more inferior coals. It all depends on the markets.
Thank you for that answer, Cornelis. So I think we're coming to time here. I'm going to bring it to a close with one final question. I know that it was asked by Tim and actually answered by you already, Chris, in the chat, but it'd be great to kind of state this again. So how can the public influence the AER process about project assessments? Statements of concern are dismissed if submissions cannot prove their directly impacted status. Water flow from the Rockies affects us all. So thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, one way to influence the regulator is indirectly by influencing elected officials, right? So the Alberta Energy Regulator is an arm's length entity, but it is very attuned to the desires of the government and the policies of that government, and so that is the best way to influence them. And I think there is, there are opportunities to participate directly in the process, but you have to jump through all kinds of hoops, and there's all kinds of barriers to participation. So the way to overcome that is to form coalitions with parties that have directly affected status. So that's always been a challenge. I think the AER has not made it any easier over the years. But if you really want to participate directly in the hearing process, that there is a way of doing it. It's sort of think of it as a tactic.
Thanks, Chris. Any other words from our other panelists just on ways to get engaged? I think Chris said it pretty directly. It's important to write to your decision makers so they can have the influence on the regulator. Any thoughts, Willem, Cornelis, or Ian?
There was kind of a public, during the Grassy Mountain hearings, anybody could put comments on their webpage. I don't know if they looked at it or what kind of influence it has, but certainly, well, as you know, there were lots of people have written letters to all the ministers, and you get standard answer back that they look at it or whatever. But
I think, Willem,
I'm real curious if they're really going to listen to the Albertans in the decision making, and how much influence the federal government has there, because it's certainly a water issue. So the fisheries should be concerned about it. But I guess we'll hear
Ian,
in the fall.
Yeah. I was just going to say, Ian, I know you might have a few thoughts. In looking at the online comments, there were some surprising results there in a positive way. Ian, do you want to share that information?
No, I was just, what I wanted to add with what Willem said with respect to the public comments. I mean, I think that we've done some work on the public comments that were made about Grassy, and the level of engagement and opposition to Grassy that you'll find in those public comments is absolutely astounding. I mean, it's amazing. It was an amazing outpouring of opposition. It also, though, Willem's comment, though, also highlights such an important difference between a joint federal provincial review process and something that the AER is responsible for. I mean, I stand to be corrected, I guess, but I think it'd be very hard for me to identify a Alberta energy regulator process that gets anywhere near the transparency and inclusiveness of an assessment process that's done under the federal legislation. So I think that's a huge difference, and it's a reason why. I mean, there were people on this list tonight. I mean, people in the chat who I know are pushing, writing to Minister Wilkinson, asking him to designate Tent Mountain as a designated project under the Impact Assessment Act. Why do that? Well, you do that because I think in part, you know that the process is much more conducive to public participation than the Alberta process is.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. It really was, well, the whole last summer, it was a big concern in southern Alberta, but the rest of Alberta was not too aware of it, even during the hearings. But it wasn't until Corb Lund put his stuff up on Facebook that people started to notice. So that's why I said, well, get Wayne Gretzky behind it, or get somebody. Well, it's important to get, well, already the originally really supporters of the PCs, the ranchers in southern Alberta, they are all against it now. So that's an important voice. Now there's the councillor of the Crowsnest Pass said, yeah, well, there's 2,000 people in the Crowsnest Pass, and there's 60 ranchers. And she had a point there, but it has come to the concern of people in Lethbridge. So there's a lot of people there that starting to oppose it, and so that's important.
So if I could add to it, I think, you know, public direct pressure, you know, on elected officials is really does actually have an impact, and but also a whole bunch of other tactics need to be employed as well. So something that everybody on this call could do, and encourage you to spread this message to others as well, is make a significant one-time or multi-year contribution, financial contribution to the AWA or other groups that are working on this issue. And you know, you might want to spread your chips across a couple of different organizations that are taking a different approach, you know, or you might want to focus all of it on one. You really, these organizations are operate on an extremely like thin budget. There's a lot of things that they could do that they just don't have the resources to do. And we really need these types of organizations to be not only engaging in the regulatory process, but thinking through strategies around how to engage with the government directly, government relations campaigns to raise public awareness through the media and other ways. And ultimately sort of zero in on exactly what is it that's going to make the government change its mind and apply the pressure there. And sometimes it takes a while to figure out exactly what that is, and or it changes over time. And but you know, these groups require resources to do that. And so so consider doing that. And I think this would be, I think this is a winnable sort of campaign, but it will require resources.
Yeah, thanks for that plug, Chris. You made it before I had the opportunity. And I think with that being said, this is a good point for me to wrap up the evening. I just want to take this moment to thank all of our presenters. Thank you, Chris, Willem, Cornelis, Ian. You've been fantastic. I want to thank the rest of the staff here at AWA for supporting, especially Sean Nichols, who is our excellent timekeeper, working in the background and letting people in from the waiting room. And thank you, a huge thank you to the Coal Policy Working Group for your ongoing work. I have all of their logos here if you want to give them a little bit of recognition and a little bit of love. And especially thanks to our audience. It's all of you who are making the difference, who are writing in, who are raising your voices, putting out lawn signs. And this is going to make the difference in the end. So thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. We are going to be posting this to YouTube, as I said. The presentations will be posted to albertawilderness.ca. And keep your eyes peeled on our website, as we are going to be hosting one more town hall in the coming month or two. So thank you, everyone. And with that being said, good night. Have a great night and take care.
Hey, everyone.
Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you.